welcome back to another video. This really popped when I saw it. That to me is a monster increase. Again, this book got hot. This book is ready to go higher. So let's jump right into it. We are back today with another statue review from Diamond Select Toys. Without further ado, let's get into the review. What is going on YouTube? This is Lawrence over at Mighty Comics and Collectibles. I want to thank you guys for joining me for another video. Today I have a big one for you and it's only part one. We're talking about the comic book investment hierarchy. The top line books you guys should be buying for investments. Now stick with me here because there are a lot of massive books on this list. But as I get into part two of this video, there'll be some more affordable books. But I always want to start at the top and the top investment books of all time, and I will rank them going forward. But before we get started in this video, like always guys, I want to remind you, if you're not a current subscriber of the channel, do me a favor, go ahead, click that subscribe button for me. You will not regret it. I want you to smash the hell out of that like button. Let's get this video out there for everyone in the community. You guys know I'm doing a 4,000 sub giveaway. I'm giving an awesome Diamond Select Toys Thanos diorama away to one lucky subscriber, so be on the lookout for that when we get to 4,000. I think we're just about 300 away. With that said, let's get into this video. As you guys can see, I'm calling this the hierarchy of comic book investments. And of course, these are the books that I would be investing in right now for the long term if you wanted to set up a comic book investment. Now, I'll say this right off the bat, not all comic books are investments. In fact, I'd only probably be sticking to the ones I mentioned in these next two videos. So keep that in mind. And not a lot of people out there are going to like what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. We're going to start at the top spot because you guys know that's how we do it on this list. And of course, this is ranked from 1 all the way down to whatever we get to. At the top spot on this list, guys, is a copy of Action Comics #1 and the first appearance and origin of Superman. That's right, the character that started it all. This is also the first appearance of Lois Lane. It's probably the biggest comic book in history. This book was published in April 1938, even though it did have an issue date of June of that year. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the price, and we're going to talk a little about the census data. Of course, the last sale for this book was a whopping CGC 3.0 for $1,638,759, and the last sale on any Action Comics 1, according to the GPA, was December 2021. Now we get into the census data, and there are only a total of 75 copies graded out there by CGC, and all the data that I pull will either be from GPA or from CGC, so keep that in mind. Now, of those 75 total, only 43 are universal blue labels. There's 1 qualified book and 31 restored copies. Now, there may be other copies out there that are not known, maybe graded by a different grading company, but keep in mind this is the biggest, most scarce book out there, and it has to be at the top spot in the hierarchy. So the next book on our hierarchy, I'm going to call 1B. If Action Comics #1 is 1A, this book is definitely 1B. It is a copy of Detective Comics #27, and of course the first appearance of Batman. That's right, of course, is also the first appearance of James Commissioner Gordon and a few others as well. Regardless, guys, we're talking about the last sale for this book in January of 2022 was a CGC 4.5 that sold for $1,140,000. This book was published in May of 1939. Now, for a census count, there are only a whopping 74 copies of this book on the census. 36 were universal blue label, 1 qualified again, and of course 37 restored copies. Now when we talk about golden age books, and you guys know on this channel I'm just starting to get into the golden age of comic books, there are no two bigger characters out there than Batman and Superman, and these two are the gold standard for all comic book investments, and that's why we have to start talking about the hierarchy with these two books. I'm sure most of you out there knew that Action Comics 1 and Detective Comics 27 are the gold standard of comic book investments. But maybe you didn't know the same two characters hold the next 2 spots on this hierarchy. And we're going to start with Superman #1, and of course the first appearance of Superman in his own title. But not only that, this is also his origin story. This book was published in summer of 1939 in a CGC 1.8, just sold this November, only a couple of months ago, for $288,000, a whopping amount of money. We're going to go to the CGC census and see there are only 168 copies graded by CGC. 71, of course, are universal grade, 4 qualified books, and only 93 restored copies. Man, if you can go out there and pull out a Superman 1 and be only 170 people out there to own one, a remarkable feat. The next comic book on my hierarchy is a copy of Batman #1 and the first appearance of Batman in his own solo title. But not only that, 2 huge villains appear in this book for the very first time. That is, of course, the Joker and a character known as the Cat, who would later go on to be known as Catwoman. In a CGC 1.8, just sold this month, January 2023, for $126,000 on Heritage Auctions. Of course, this book was published in the spring of 1940, and 295 copies can be found on the CGC census. 140 blue universal grades, 7 green qualified labels, 3 signature series, believe it or not, and 145 restored copies. Now, you guys know I don't buy restored books. However, when it comes to super rare golden age books like this one, massive keys, I think it's fine to go out and get a restored copy. I think it's fine to go out and get an incomplete copy if that's what you can afford. There's only so many of these things around. If you can go out and get one of these books, it's always worth it. As we move down the comic book investing hierarchy, you'll notice we've only spoke about 2 characters, Superman and Batman, and they started this whole thing off, and I think they deserve the top 4 spots on these lists. But as we move down on the hierarchy, you notice some other characters, and we're going to stay in the golden age. But my next pick, it is a copy of Captain America #1 and the first appearance of Captain America, Steve Rogers. But not only that, in this book are first appearances of Bucky Barnes and the Red Skull, Captain America's arch nemesis. This book was published in early 1941 by Timely Comics. And CGC 4.5 just sold this month, believe it or not, for $194,400. As we get into the CGC census, there only have been 186 copies have been graded. 91 universal grade, 6 qualified grades, 3 signature series, and 86 restored copies. Again, when we're talking about golden age, I think restored is fine. If you can go out and get this book for any grade, any price, even if it's incomplete, I still think it's worth it because there's under 200 copies available. This is the next one on my list. At the next spot on my hierarchy is an ultra rare book. We're talking about Marvel Comics #1 and the first appearance of the Human Torch, Khazar, Angel, Jungle Terror, and the Masked Raider. This is also the origin story of the Submariner, and believe it or not, the first timely comic ever. This book was published in November of 1939, and the last sale I could find on GPA for this book was a CGC 3.0 for $223,200 just this past November. And when we say ultra rare, we're talking under 70 copies by the CGC census, 67 copies to be exact. 35 universal grade, 0 qualified, 0 signature series, and 32 restored copies. The highest grade of this book was a 9.4 universal grade. There is 1 copy out there. There are also 2 9.4 restored copies. But man, we talk about ultra rare. This book had to come at this spot because you just can't find them. As we move along in our hierarchy, we're going to stay in the golden age and possibly talk about the greatest female character ever written. And that's right, we're talking about All-Star Comics #8 and the origin and first appearance of Wonder Woman. This book was published in 1942 and features our first female lead character in a CGC 4.5 just sold this month for $43,200. And the first thing off my mind is how cheap this book is at a 4.5. We're going to go to the CG census data and find out there are only 199 copies out there for sale. 142 blue label, 6 qualified, 1 signature series, and 50 restored copies. Now, whenever I talk about this book, I talk about how I passed this book up for sale about a year ago. I went to a local show that had a 0.5 available for I think around $30,000, and I balked at it, and I regret it ever since. We're talking about the trio of DC characters. We can't talk about Superman, Batman, and of course Wonder Woman, an ultra important book, and that's why I had to put it at this spot. Next book I had to go to on this list was a copy of Flash Comics #1 and the first appearance and origin of the original Flash, Jay Garrick. This is also the first appearance of Hawkman, Johnny Thunder, Whip, and Shiera Sanders. This book was published by DC Comics in January of 1940, and the last sale was a CGC 5.0 this month. I can't believe how many Golden Age book keys are selling right now for $192,000. Again, I don't think I've ever seen this book anywhere for sale. And as we get into the CGC data, you know, another ultra rare copy, under 100 books graded by CGC, 86 in total, 46 blue universal labels, 2 qualified, and 38 restore copies, 0 signature series. So again, an ultra rare book that I think not a lot of people can go out and think they can afford, but for the ultra rich that can go ahead and spend almost $200,000 on a comic book, this one is pretty rare. The next spot on this list is reserved for the most ultra rare comic book on this hierarchy. It is a copy of All American Comics #16 and features the origin and first appearance of the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott. This book also features a full-page ad for All-Star Comics #1. It was published in July of 1940 by DC Comics and is CGC 3.5, just sold in September 2020 for only $72,000. And of course, this was before the huge comic boom. I do know that Jeff the Golden Age Guru picked up a copy of this one, but I gotta be honest, I don't think I've ever seen a copy of this book anywhere in my lifetime outside of Jeff's hands. Regardless, if we go to the CG census data, there are only 61 copies graded ever by CGC, 30 universal blue label, 3 qualified, and 28 restored copies. Man, for a major character like Green Lantern to finally show up and again have only 60 copies available, that is a crazy. As we move down in our hierarchy right now, we're going to start talking about Marvel comic books with a little DC sprinkled in. We're going to start off by talking about one of the most famous comic book characters of all time and probably the most popular. That's right, you know we're talking about Amazing Fantasy #15 and the origin and first appearance of the greatest superhero of all time, Spider-Man, Peter Parker. This is also the first appearance of Uncle Ben and Aunt May. Of course, the story was done by Stan Lee, art by Steve Ditko, and an amazing Jack Kirby cover. You all know this was published in August of 1962 and is CGC 9.2, just sold this month for $810,000, believe it or not. I'm not sure if any of you out there know, there are actually quite a few copies out there on the census. 3,710 graded copies by CGC. We know that there are a few out there done by CBCS and others, and probably there's still a few raws out there as well. There were 2,402 universal grades, 53 qualified, 298 signature series copies, which yours truly has one of, and of course 957 copies of restored books. The highest grade out there is a 9.8 near mint restored copy. Unbelievable. Regardless, guys, when we're talking about the Silver Age, this book is king. I'm actually surprised how far down on this hierarchy it is. And I think anyone out there, for the most part, when we collect comic books, this is mainly the book that we want to go out there and get. If you went back about 3 or 4 years, this book in low grade was sitting about $10,000 minimum. But right now, you're probably looking at a 1.5, anywhere from 17 to 18 grand just to get started. Regardless, I think anyone who wants to own a comic book, this is a realistic one to own. To be only one of 4,000 to own a copy of this one, consider yourself in lucky territory. Side by side with AF-15 is a copy of Detective Comics #31 in this iconic cover by the great Bob Kane. This also features the first appearance of the Batplane, first appearance of the Monk, and of Julie Madison. This book was published in September of 1939 by DC Comics and is CGC 1.5, just sold a couple of months ago for $66,000. I have been looking for this one on Heritage, sent out a few offers, only to have been denied. Regardless, there are only 96 copies on the CGC census. I did not think this book was this rare. 59 universal blue label grades, 0 qualified, 1 signature series, and 36 restored copies. Again, we talk about Golden Age books. I think restored is fine, universal is great, signature series, only 1 out there. That is unbelievable. But this book is so iconic. It has been homaged, I think, a bunch of times with Batman #227 and a few others. Definitely a book that I'd be looking into if you want something that's scarce and not too bad when we're talking about price. Next up in our hierarchy is a book that I think everybody out there knows. It is a copy of Incredible Hulk #1 and the first appearance and origin of the Incredible Hulk. It's also the first appearance of Rick Jones, Betty Ross, and General Thunderbolt Ross. This book was published in May of 1962 by Marvel Comics and is CGC 3.0, just sold this month for $16,800. Now this is down over the past 6 months. Again, it was scorching hot over the past year. Even so, a few years back you could have had a 0.5 copy for about $3,500. Now we're talking a 3.0 for just under $17,000. As we get into the census data, I'm going to remind you that this is the scarcest Marvel book out there right now. There are 1,996 copies graded by CGC, 1,392 universal grade, 35 qualified, 131 signature series, and 438 restored copies. This is a rare book when we're talking Marvel, a great Marvel character. I had to put it higher up because of the lesser amount of books out there as compared to other Marvel comics. Right next to the Hulk is the last DC book on the part 1 of this video. It is a copy of Showcase #4 and the origin and first appearance of the Silver Age Flash, Barry Allen. Of course, this is also the first appearance of Iris West. This book was published in September of 1956 by DC Comics. But believe it or not, this book is ultra rare for a DC Silver Age key and is CGC 2.5, sold last year for $11,850. When we talk about scarcity for a Silver Age book, I'm going to compare this to AF-15. AF-15 just has 4,000 CGC graded copies as compared to this one with only 566 CG shaded copies out there. 406 universal, 6 qualified, 2 signature series, and 152 restored copies. The problem with this book out there is that there isn't a lot of interest in this Silver Age Flash. Because it's ultra rare, I had to put it at this spot. I would love to be able to find this book for a deal because as DC goes forward with James Gunn, you do not know how important this character is going to be. We could see this book go for a monumental jump because of the rarity. Either way, it made it to this part of the hierarchy and the last DC book on this list. And rounding out part 1 of the comic book investing hierarchy is the Marvel family that started it all. Fantastic Four #1, the origin and first appearance of the Fantastic Four. Mr. Fantastic, Ben Grimm, Sue Storm, and Johnny Storm. This is also the first appearance of the Mole Man. This book was published in November of 1961 and is CGC 3.5, just sold this month for only $17,500. Another ultra rare book when we're talking about Marvel Comics. There were 2,790 copies graded by CGC, 1,905 universal label, 26 qualified, 194 signature series, and 665 restored copies out there. Again, if you're a Fantastic Four fan with the FF coming to the MCU, you never know where this book is going to go. Right now we're in a lull in the comic market, but I think long term, all of these books that I mentioned so far in part 1 are the greatest comic book investments out there. That's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. Again, when we're talking about comic book investments, the ones I've gone over today are probably the best out there. I know they're a ton of money, and most of us out there can't go out and spend this kind of money. Regardless, you guys know I'm putting out a part 2 to this video with more common comic books, but keep in mind, when we're talking about investment purposes, only a certain few comics out there that I really want to own for the long term, and these are it. Stay tuned for part 2. This is Lawrence over at Mighty Comics and Collectibles saying thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys soon.